नमस्ते एवरीबॉडी। क्योंकि पोइट्री से माहौल ख़त्म हुआ, पोइट्री से शुरू करते हैं। वो लम्हा जो तुमने दे दिया किसी को, वो न लौटेगा तुम्हारे बुलाने से न मेरे चाहने से। वो लम्हा जो तुमने दे दिया किसी को, वो न लौटेगा तुम्हारे बुलाने से न मेरे चाहने से। वक्त की कलम से कितना कुछ लिख गया है, वो या तो खो गया है या बिक गया है। वो लम्हा जो तुमने दे दिया किसी को, वो लम्हा चाहता तो दूरियां मिटा सकता था, एहसास ना सही कम से कम आरजू जगा सकता था। खैर जो उसकी फितरत थी उसमें शरारत थी, और हाथों से फिसल जाना वक्त की पुरानी आदत थी। वो रूठा भी नहीं था जो मान जाता तेरे या मेरे मनाने से। वो लम्हा जो तुमने दे दिया किसी को, वो न लौटेगा तुम्हारे बुलाने से न मेरे चाहने से। वो लम्हा जख्म बन जाएगा, रह रह के याद आएगा, लाएगा हंसी होठों पे तो आंखों में आंसू भी लाएगा। वो लम्हा यकीनन जख्म बन जाएगा। तुम कहते हो तुमने दे दिया, पर जिसको दिया उसके पास अब तक नहीं पहुंचा। वो कहता है उसने वापस कर दिया, पर वो लम्हा मेरा अब तक घर नहीं लौटा। क्योंकि मैं जानता हूँ वो लम्हा ठहरा हुआ है हम दोनों के बीच बहाने से। वो लम्हा जो तुमने दे दिया किसी को, वो न लौटेगा तुम्हारे बुलाने से न मेरे चाहने से। वो लम्हा। थैंक यू। I wrote this poem in the first year of college, though I remember the germs of this idea about a moment in time coming to me somewhere in class 9th after a debate competition. And the reason it took me so many years to write the poem is not because of a lack of vocabulary or experience. It's because I grew up believing that if it did not rhyme, it was not a good poem. So for the longest time, doesn't that happen with school? So for the longest time, trust me, my most favorite piece of writing was, there is a cat sitting on a mat eating a rat, and that is that. I said, yes, all for rhyme, all for rhyme. And every time I would attempt or encourage myself to pen down my thoughts, I would stop on the fourth line because I could not find ghar with savar and something. So I always would measure that up. Somewhere along the way, I realized growing up that it doesn't have to rhyme. The reality of someone else's jurisdiction and someone else's decisions should not influence the blueprints of your dreams. And whatever you want to say, you should say in the meter and the form and the lehja of your language. So I was never the kind of kid growing up in school who could pinpoint and say, that is it. That is what I'm going to become when I grow up. I was always participating in almost every activity there was in school. Debating, painting, people would find me all over the place. Of course, I was not appreciated for it all the time. But I learned something from it. So I wanted to show you, if we could switch to the PPT. I want you to take a look at this drawing. During my Diwali cleaning, my parents sent me my drawing book from class 7th. And see, I mean, the tortoise is not that great, but the focus is on the B1. And the teacher, if you see, was about to give me an A. He just made a life-changing decision where he just like, no, B1. And I remember coming home that day because I'd spent a considerable amount of time the night before the submission to make that. And he'd said, you're horrible. You don't have a color scheme. Like, who puts a green turtle on a green? And whatever that influence was in my mind, I never stopped. I loved painting. So I couldn't give two hoots about what the color palette was. If I liked to paint, I would continue doing so. And just 2 months ago, I painted something on a flight back from New York. I was reading an article that said, a lot of people in the world, especially young people, are growing up believing that bearded men are terrorists and hijabi women are also terrorists, and have this sort of bias. As an educator, as a human being, I was so moved by that article that I thought the next time I'm going to step into a class, my students would be believing the same. And what can I do? So I, went back to what I knew best, art. So I just on the flight painted a faceless hijab, and when I reached back India, I posted it on Facebook and tagged 2 of my artist friends, and I said, under the hijab is an incredible identity. What is under the hijab for you? So Purnima Sukumar and Sadhana Prasad, the two artists, created their versions and sent me what they thought under the hijab was for them. And slowly, within a week, it became a global movement. Women from Iran and Saudi and husbands of people from Afghanistan wrote in saying that my wife is printing these posters, keep them going. She's putting them across the hallway in her office here in Iran to remind her colleague she's more than that back piece of cloth she wears. Amazing. Under the hijab is a universe. Under the hijab is tenderness. And this comes from people who see these hijabi women on the street. And I was reminded of the art teacher who said, your color scheme does not work for me. And you know, the hurtful part is, it's not that he gave me B1. He gave my sister on the same drawing A2 and a very good. So I told my parents to find her drawing also. And I was so puzzled. I mean, listen, what's the difference? Maybe just the grass, you know. But A2 and B1 didn't work for me. Overall, when I was starting to believe that I could do under the hijab and I could do whatever, at a conference this year, early this year, I was introduced on stage by the host as, ladies and gentlemen, the next speaker has an early morning job, a morning job, an afternoon job, an evening job, a late night job. And if Deepak Ramola finds time, he has a couple of other jobs during that. Most of the people who are my friends were offended by that introduction. But I was not. It's the sweetest compliment you could give me, that I am able to cut through cultures, I'm able to cut through industries and pursue whatever I like. So when he said he does a lot of jobs, I agreed with him. I nodded backstage when I went on to give my speech. So when I understand that I can maybe paint, from that, I paint. When I know I can write songs for Bollywood films, I write songs for Bollywood films. When I know that I can write for TV shows, I go and write for TV shows because my dad is a chef and I love food. So I do that. When I know that I can do poetry, I perform in open mics around the country, host poetry workshops, invite students and tell them how to mix words and how to flow through them. When I know I can write albums for a film, I go write albums for a film. But I am reminded of that 7-year-old again and again as I go across doing these multiple jobs. Because I know that there are people in the world who are too much pressurized by their peer groups and people around them to find out what they can do rather than who they can be. I found out who I can be, not what can I do. Because that changes. It changes on a daily basis of what I can do. I think of all those people, and I don't have to look that far, because my mother herself never had the opportunity to go to school. In grade 5, she was pulled out by her grandmother back in the 60s on the pretext of no daughter of the house should be allowed to study, and no daughter of the house should be allowed to study with boys. So my mother never went to school, but I grew up with a woman who would argue with my dad and win with the best arguments, like mic drop moments in the house. She would take the salary, do the financial management of the house, the pocket money, the bills, the relatives, everything. So I grew up thinking that this woman is lying to me and my sister. She says she doesn't go to school, but that's what they teach you in school. Time management, financial management, communication, all of that, debating. So I one day walked up to my mother, I think 3 days before this picture was taken. I said, you are the biggest liar in the world. You say you didn't go to school, and how do you know so much? My mother said, I didn't go to school, but I have been paying attention to everything life has been teaching me. The moment you had, I had that too. Years later, at the moment I thought, oh my God, poor ignorant woman, such a philosophical answer. But that statement stayed with me. So anybody who came home for dinner or any wedding we went to, after that day, I asked everybody, hey, my mother didn't even go to school. She knows so much. What do you know about life? And whatever their answer was, I would note it down on the back pages of my notebook in my diary. And every time life would hit me, or I was bullied, or I was needing navigation in life, I would go back to the back pages and read someone's life lesson. And I say, oh, that person at 45 figured that out. Maybe I can do this at 17. Maybe I can be a boss. And then I would read a 6-year-old's life lesson. And I would say, she figured it at 6. It's taken me 12 more years to get here. It's okay, not no more. And then I would follow that. And somehow this to and fro with the learnings of other people became my coping mechanism. And I started sharing it with my best friend, with my sister. I remember the first time she had a breakup. She was crying on the terrace and she was like, I thought I loved him. 9th grade love. You thought the world has ended. And she's like, oh, I thought he loved me. And she was crying. And I was like, why are you crying? You remember this lady we met at a wedding 3 weeks back? She said she's 23, which is 6 years older than you. And she said life has taught her what is for you shall not pass you by. And my sister, literally in a dramatic fashion, stops crying and says, what is for you shall not pass you by. I will remember that and look for that one. And got over. And I was like, yes, it's working. So over the years, I realized the population of the world as we sit here in Zorba Gardens is 7.447 billion, which means that there are 7.447 billion mistakes to learn from, 7.447 stories to get inspired from, 7.447 billion heartbreaks to associate with, 7.447 billion successes to be achieved, and 7.447 billion life lessons if each one gave one. So I was on a mission to collect life lessons of people, and it led me to find the organization I run now. It's called Project Fuel. Fuel stands for Forward the Understanding of Every Life Lesson. And what we do in Project Fuel is collect life lessons of people from all around the world and design them into interactive and performance-based activities. So that you just don't read someone's life lesson like a quote, you experience it for yourself. Over the years, I have had the privilege to teach people from age 4 to 96 years old, and all walks of life. And somewhere along the way, I questioned myself to think, what would have happened if I wouldn't have started to teach at the age of 17? Certainly, I wouldn't have met Shrey and Shobhit, who heard my talk and heard my workshop and came to find their own organization that now puts engineering curriculum for free for underprivileged engineering students so that they don't have to worry about coaching fees. I think of Madhu in Nepal, who suffers from HIV/AIDS at the age of 15, and the life lessons of another 15-year-old girl from Afghanistan who got married that year. When Madhu heard those life lessons, she was determined that whatever days in her life are left, she's going to make sure she doesn't live in shame. She represented Nepal at World Children Prize the very next year. I was able to meet thousands of people around the globe in the pursuit of these life lessons. But most importantly, why it was important to be this petite-voiced boy teaching people double his age is because otherwise I wouldn't have no entertainment. When I taught in Haryana, very early on in my career, I was 18 years old, and my voice sounded somewhat like this. Hi everybody, good morning. And there were 500 Haryanvi men in the room. It was an engineering college. So the principal had always communicated on email with me. Like, Mr. Ramola, we are very pleased to have you. This is the setting, all of that. So when I showed up in his office that morning before the class, he was shocked out of his wits. He said, can I give you an advice? And I said, sure. He said, just do a video conference someday later. And I said, why? He said, so you have to understand, they're double your size, triple your height. If they don't like you, they will rip you apart. So I told him, I said, I've done this, it's okay, I'll do it. So I went into the class and I walked in and I stood and I said, I'm very nervous, everybody. Your principal told me that you all are dangerous people. And this one Jat boy in the front said, आवाज पतली है but चला लेंगे. And I think of that moment and I love it because he made me so comfortable in that moment because he told me, we accept you as you are. So carry on with whatever you have to share. We will choose if we like it or not. Really show what you've got. I feel that emotion resurrects me every time I am in a classroom across a person in the world. When I happen to read about the Syrian refugee conflict and the Sudanese refugee conflict and the Eritrean refugee conflict and the Afghani migration and the Pakistani migration, I thought, well, the only thing I get to see in the media is people in a boat on the Mediterranean Sea drowning. I'm sure that is a reality, but that's not the only reality. And as Chimamanda Ngozi says, the trouble with the stereotype is not that it is not true, but that it is incomplete. So I wanted to find the complete truth. I wanted to travel across continents to meet these refugees and see what that boat ride had taught them. So I traveled for 90 days without a single day off across 5 countries in Europe. And in this particular story that I'm about to tell you, you see the picture of a camp, an illegal refugee camp in Calais, the south of France. Now, the specific thing about this jungle is that there are 7,000 men, and their only goal every day is to get to England because Calais is on the highway to England. And there are 4 or 5 trucks that pass every night. So their goal is to stop the truck, smuggle themselves in, and illegally smuggle themselves up to a new dawn in England. Now, that would be an idea that people are pursuing. But when you get to be with 7,000 men, desperate, violent, in a refugee camp with no amenities, it becomes a war. So at 7 o'clock, I would be sitting with somebody doing an interview, and I would come back the next day and I would be attending his funeral because he was trying to chase the truck and came under it and died. Or I would meet somebody who took a truck, but the truck did not go to England, went to Belgium. So got down at Belgium, walked all the way for 20 days, and was just on his way back home to try again that night. I tell you the story of this particular day and this particular camp from the 90 days is because when I was there collecting life lessons, a lot of people questioned me and said, listen, they're going to be there forever, man. Refugee problem is not going to go. Why are you wasting your time? Why are you eating out of the mud with them? Come back, live a comfortable life. Work in Bollywood, your career is doing well. Why don't you write a couple of more songs? As soon as I got back, and literally 3 weeks ago, the French government and the new French presidential candidate announced that his first #1 goal was to demolish the Calais refugee jungle. And the 7,000 men would go homeless in a single day. The whole demolition was carried out in 2 days. The very first day I was traveling, so I didn't catch on the news. The very first day the demolishers showed up, I received a message from a guy named Khalid, who I had met on day 1 in the camp. And he said, can you send me my life lesson? I just need it today. So I sent him his life lesson. I said, Khalid, what's the issue? And he said, I am migrating again. I don't know where I am going to go, but I just wanted to take exactly what I said to you. Now, when I look back at the 7,000 friends I had in that refugee jungle, I have the responsibility of sharing those life lessons with you. So what I am doing is I'm taking the satellite map of the jungle before it got demolished, and I'm converting it into a digital map, exactly where my friends lived in that jungle. And you can click on any tent and get to learn from the refugee who used to live inside it. I was able to speak to a refugee from Afghanistan. His name is Atal. And I met him and I was saying, Atal, what are your plans? What are you doing here? And he could speak Hindi. So he said, Deepak bhai, I'm in a confusion to go back home or struggle to go to England and earn money and get my family. I told him, go home. You won't believe. He actually did. And now just got married 2 days ago and is in Pakistan on a honeymoon. I am sharing all of these little success stories and heartwarming stories with you to tell you, do not underestimate what you can do for one person. Stand alone. Does not matter what country you come from and if it's your problem or not. When I was planning and prepping for the tour, people said it's a Syrian problem and a European problem. An Indian has nothing to do with it. But when you show up in front of Atal, when you hug Khalid, you understand it's a human problem. And as a human being, you need to address it. So, what I have understood and what I want you to take away from this talk is that your talent is not your gift. it's your responsibility. It's your responsibility to make it feel like a gift to every person who doesn't have the skill and the resources to pursue or execute that talent. And when you understand that, even a portion of that, hey, my talent is not my gift, it's my responsibility, you will travel across continents. You will transcend the boundaries of language. And you will sit across people to understand what they stand for. And it will add to your life as it did to mine. So now, as I document stories in India, outside India, I want to leave you with a poem I wrote on a road trip last year. Looking at this picture, I collaborated with a photographer, and the poem talks about our chase for that destination. Dare dare danam danam, dare dare danam danam, मेरा मन हरदम हरदम डरे डरे दानम दानम. ये जो कश्ती लेके निकला है माझी साहिल से दूर, इसकी आंखों की चमक बता रही है आज खाली हाथ नहीं लौटेगा. हो कितनी भी तेज आंधी, कितना भी परेशान मौसम, ये ढूंढ लेगा मंजिल, पाएगा जो भी चाहिए इसे. लहरों को बांधने की ख्वाहिश लिए यूं तो पहले भी कई बार चला है ये. ढलते सूरज को जरा धीमे से सरकता पानी में देख समझा भला आदमी है ये. भूला रास्ता तो हवा ने खुसफुसा के कानों में बताया रास्ता आगे का. पर सवाल ये है कि आगे जाना कहाँ है? बहती नदी के साथ मंजिल को बांधना, मंजिल के पास जाना है या मंजिल से दूर होना? क्योंकि जो यहाँ था अभी कुछ देर पहले वो चंद लम्हों में कहीं नहीं होगा. जो आज हो रहा था वो कल नहीं होगा. शहर का आदमी भी निकलता है हर रोज बांध कर मंजिल अपनी वक्त की नदी से. क्या पाएगा शाम ढलने तक, क्या खोएगा वो भी न जाने किस तरह से. तो मेरी मानिए कुछ सिलसिलों में चाहत मंजिल की ख़त्म कर देनी चाहिए. जो न चाहता हो सफ़र में आदमी वो भी पा जाए तो फिर एक अलग मज़ा है. क्योंकि साहिल से दूर जो कश्ती लेके निकला है माझी, माना उसकी आंखों में चमक है, मुझे फिर भी उसकी बेहद फिक्र है. क्योंकि डरे डरे दानम दानम, मन मोरा हरदम हरदम. थैंक यू एवरीवन.